Hey everyone, welcome to the SaMMF seminar. We're really excited to have Giulia Brancaccio presenting search frictions and efficiency in decentralized transport markets today. Giulia's co-authors are also in attendance, Mytro and Theodore, that will be answering questions in the Q&A. For attendees, please address all your questions to the Q&A feature in Zoom. Giulia is going to have an hour to talk, and then we'll have 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. And if you want to ask questions live at the end, it'll be during the 15-minute Q&A section. We're also really excited to have a great group of panelists joining us today. Brianna Chang, Jean-Francois Houd, Manolis Galianos, Alessandro Gabassa, Ricardo Lagos, Guido Menzio, Pierre-Olivier Weil, and I think Randy will join us soon. So thanks everyone for being here. And Giulia, I'm going to stop sharing. Feel free to share your slides and take it away.
Okay, can you all see?
Looks good.
Okay. So thank you everyone for connecting. Thank you to the organizer for including this paper, and thank you for the panelists to agree to panel. So this is a joint project with Mytro Kalouptsidi, Theo Papageorgiou, and Nicola Rosai, who's a brilliant PhD student from Harvard, who's on the market this year. So in this paper, we are going to talk, as you can see from the title, about transportation market. So let me start right there. So transport sector is an increasingly prevalent in our everyday life. It essentially shapes the movement and of people and goods over space, and we are in a time where people and goods are traveling, more and longer distances than ever before. Of course, it doesn't feel the way, it hasn't felt that way, but in the last few months, but it's still the case. And on top of that, this sector in the last 10 years has witnessed very rapid technological changes that really brought it to the spotlight, both for the policymaker and academics who are essentially grappling with the question of how to regulate this sector. Now, it's important to emphasize that for several transport markets, the interaction between agents happen in a decentralized fashion, meaning that there is no centralized marketplace for agents to come together and trade. As an example, this is the case for taxi cabs, as you probably have all experienced in your everyday life, but it's the same also for trucks, bulk shipping. And as it is often the case for the decentralized market, these markets also tend to be characterized by search friction. So you may have an agent in the same carrier in the same location where a customer is searching, but they may fail to meet. And this happens because of these factors like information frictions or physical constraints, you name it. So what we want to do in this paper is to study how the presence of search friction distort market outcomes in the centralized transport market. We want to study the efficiency properties of these markets and think about optimal policy here. To do that, we are going to start providing a fairly general model for the centralized transport market. And we are going to do that by building on what can be arguably considered the workhorse model for this type of markets. This was first proposed by Lagos and then was used as an example by Buchholz in his job market paper. We also used it in our previous paper with Mytro. And we are going to build on this model and come up with generalize them a little bit and come up with something that nests different modes of transportation. To fix ideas, we are going to think about forward-looking carriers traveling across a network of locations, and in this location, meeting passengers subject to search frictions. We're going to take this model and use it to think about efficiency in these markets. I should clarify that when I say efficiency, I actually mean constrained efficiency, meaning that we are going to assume that the social planner takes the constraints imposed by the matching technology as given. They cannot do anything about search frictions. And when we started thinking about this model, we were certain that this was going to be a, computational paper. And the reason is that, the dynamic nature of this decision-making in this market and the interconnectedness of this location makes the theoretical analysis of this model challenging. Despite that, we are able to provide an analytical characterization for the efficient allocation in this market. We are going to provide a very simple formula for the efficient prices, and we are going to derive optimal policy that sustain this efficient allocation in a decentralized, implement the allocation in a decentralized fashion. Having done that, we're going to switch gear and we are going to move on to an empirical application where we are going to take all these empirical results and apply them to a very specific decentralized transportation market, which is the market for international dry bulk shipping. Okay, and
Giulia? Hi, Giulia, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to ask a general question about the theoretical framework. So you'll take the frictions as given. So you mentioned the taxi cab market. So arguably Uber is a platform that does away with some of those frictions of, you know, being in the same location but around the corner or something like that. So you're not going to have why Uber doesn't appear, right? This is going to be an assumption that such platforms cannot appear. Is that correct?
Yes. So, and let me add something that is going to be very clear at the end of the presentation. Unfortunately, basically, we are going to characterize in the empirical application. We are going to characterize the welfare loss that you, like the welfare gain that you can that you can get in the dry bulk shipping market by applying these efficient prices. And we are going to compute the welfare gain that you get by eliminating search frictions, right? And this eliminating search friction can be thought of as an upper bound for the benefits that come from platforms, right? And you know, I think the comparison of these two objects will be very insightful and interesting. I should also make a shout out to Nicola's job market paper that focuses specifically on competition among platforms in the taxi cab market.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so dry bulk shipping, we want to compute the welfare loss coming from the presence of search frictions. So just a slide on the related literature. The paper is related to the literature on search and matching, a more recent but very growing fast literature on urban transportation and the taxi cab markets. Moreover, there is a large, somewhat large literature more related to trade that studies transportation insofar they connect with or shape trade cost. We also related to this literature, and especially in empirical application, we are gonna rely heavily on the literature on industry dynamics. Okay. So the plan for today, I'm gonna start describing this model for transport market. I'm going to show you how we leverage this model to talk about efficiency. And finally, I'm gonna switch gear and move on to the empirical application. Okay. So if there are no questions, let me move on and tell you about this model that we are using. So this is going to be a dynamic spatial search model in discrete time. So space will be divided into a finite number of locations, each one indexed by I. So these are neighborhood if you're thinking about the taxi cab market. These are countries if you're thinking about shipping. So this is going to be the empirical application. And the key way through which geography enters the model is that different locations are at different distances to each other. This space is populated by two types of agents. We're going to have carriers, think of taxi. In the empirical application, these will be ships, and customers. Again, passenger for taxi cabs and exporters in our empirical application. So let me start by telling you what happens to the customer. So in every period and in every location, there is a number of potential customers who decide whether to start searching for transportation to go to some desired destination J. And if they decide to start searching, first of all, they pay a one-time entry cost kappa, which depends on where they are and where they want to go. And then for every period that they search, they pay a waiting cost, which again depends on their location. When they finally find the transportation, they're going to get some value Wij from being delivered to their desired destination. So this valuation again depends on origin and destination. And I should emphasize that while in the presentation we assume that this is constant, in the paper we allow for a much more complicated and general demand model where this valuation is allowed to depend on the entire, the entire matrix of quantities transported in these.
Can I ask a clarifying question, please?
Absolutely.
Randy, right?
Yeah.
What was interesting in LIGOs is that the initial conditions, that is your location, was endogenous. It came from previous rides. Are you taking the locations where customers start as given, or are you going to have that part of the equilibrium?
So they are, so once the customer once the customer is delivered, he exits from the model. This entry cost kappa ij, however, are meant to capture the idea that because of people movement, different location may have different
So the endogeneity of the location is actually very interesting. I mean, if it's easy to get a taxi to the airport and hard to get a taxi back from the airport, there'll be lots of people waiting at the airport endogenously. And the equilibrating mechanism is taxis will go to the airport. So it gives a natural, it gives a natural outcome, I think, and you should try to do that case too, if you can.
No, we do it. Sorry, I think I misunderstood the demand. So for carriers, we keep track of the entire sequence of their movement, right? So and it's going to be clear in the next slide. For customers, the number of customers waiting is endogenous, but the number of potential customers who are deciding whether to enter or not is not.
Okay.
Okay, so these valuations, because of this initial entry decision, I want to emphasize that in each location, if you look at the customers who are looking for transportation, they will be heterogeneous in their desired destination. And this is going to be an important dimension of our model. On the other side of the market, we have the carriers. They are homogeneous and they can carry at most one customer. And in every period, they can be doing a couple of things. First of all, they can be traveling either full or empty from some origin A to some destination J. For every period they travel, they pay a traveling cost, Cij, which is allowed to depend on origin and destination. And at the end of each period they travel, with some probability Dij, they arrive at their destination. This probability is how we capture the distance across different locations. Basically, 1 over Dij, it's the average time it takes a carrier to go from I to J. If a carrier is not traveling, they are searching in some location I. For every period they search, they pay a search cost CIW. They can, and they have the opportunity of randomly with customer. If that happens, that's great. They pick up the customer and they begin the trip toward the customer desired destination. If instead the carrier is unmatched, they can essentially decide where to search. So they can either remain in their current location and try to find and search for a passenger there next period, or they can start traveling empty towards some other destination J, where and search for a customer there once they arrive. So because of this structure, basically in every location, you have carrier and customer searching for each other. And to close the model, I need to tell you about the meeting process, which we model through a matching function. So basically in every location, there is a matching function Mi that, given the number of carrier and customer searching in each location, tell us the number of matches that are formed in every period. And a word about notation. Throughout the presentation, we are going to use the letter S to denote the carrier, because in the empirical application, these are ships, and E to denote the customer side, because in the empirical application, they are exporters. Okay, so given this matching function, we can define meteor rate, which we are going to denote by lambda, which is the probability that either a customer or a carrier find a match in a given period.
Oh yeah, Giulia. Is it okay if I think of the matching function as the minimum of S and E? So
we are gonna work under the assumption where this is actually this is strictly lower than the minimum. So all the inefficiencies we are gonna talk about bind if are relevant if this is equal to the minimum. I think that the model itself you can work with it even if this is a minimum. Okay, so we are going to, I'm not going to say anything about pricing mechanism. And the reason is that in the empirical, like throughout, the theory, we are going to talk about the entire set of market equilibrium in this market. So any equilibrium that can arise for different price mechanisms. Okay, so we are going to be agnostic about this. So to summarize, in every period and location, you have some potential customers who decide whether to start searching for transportation to go to some destination. You have these carriers who are traveling and arrive probabilistically. You have this random matching between carrier and customer within each location. And then the matched carriers can decide what to do. They can either wait in their current location, or they can start traveling empty toward some other place. So to actually really see the model, I think it's useful to look at some value functions. So let me show them to you. And let me start with the carrier side. And in particular, suppose that you are a carrier traveling from some origin I to some destination J. You get values Vij. So in every period, you pay your traveling cost, Cijs. With some probability Dij, you arrive at your destination J. And you get the value of searching for your next match there, which I'll define in a second. With the complement probability, next period, you're still traveling and you get your value Vij from traveling, okay? So what happens instead if you are searching in some location I? Well, you're going to pay your waiting cost CIW. With some probability lambda I, you find the match. If that happens, you pay your transportation price tau, and you start traveling toward the customer's desired destination, so you get your value function Vij. Importantly here, I'm taking the expectation over possible destination, right? Again, because customer in I may want to go to different destination. With probability 1 minus lambda I, the carrier is still unmatched next period, and in that case, they get their value Ui. What's this value? Well, the carrier at this point can decide whether to wait in location I and get next period the value of searching there, or they can start traveling empty towards some destination J, which is the best from their point of view, okay? So going back to run this question, it's important that, you know, whenever they are traveling, whenever they are deciding where to go, where the ship consider the value, takes into account the value that they will get from searching in their desired destination.
Giulia, just a couple of clarifying questions. So meeting a ship and an exporter meeting, do they always match? Or there's no heterogeneity that would preclude them from matching in this context, right? Is that correct?
So can you, so
when a ship meets with an exporter, is there any setting that they would decide not to match?
Oh, okay, so 2 points to this question. First, in the paper, we allow meetings to be rejected. Nothing changes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's important to emphasize that we are going to work with a steady state kind of model, so that, you know, if you reject, and the ships are homogeneous, okay?
Okay.
So basically, even if you are going to reject once, you're going to reject always, so you're not going to end.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay, and a second clarifying question. So I guess the supply of ships can be regulated by ships leaving empty from a particular location. What about the demand? Is the demand exogenous? Maybe you said this, but I missed it.
Oh, no. So yes, it's going to come here. Demand for ships, right? It's going to come here when we model the...
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So let me show you the value function for a matched customer, and say that you are a customer who want to go from I to J. You're going to pay your search cost, CIE, with some probability lambda I, you're going to find the match. If that happens, you get your value from being delivered, Wij. You pay your transportation price, and then you disappear from this economy. With probability 1 minus lambda I, you don't find the match. And if that happens, next period, you're still searching for transportation to go from I to J. So here the customer doesn't really have much options. So going back to your question, how do we think about the entry of these customers, right? In every period, there are new customers who enter in the market to search for transportation to some destination to replenish the pool of the agents searching. And here we model it in a very relatively straightforward way. We assume that customers will enter as long as their value from searching, Uije, is lower than some entry cost that they have to pay. And this value of searching, as an example, is going to depend on the price that they have to pay and on their waiting time. Okay, so in that sense, it's endogenous. I should also introduce this object, the destination share, which is going to be an important object for this equilibrium, which is the share of the passenger or customers in I who want to go to J. Okay. So this is the model. So if you,
Giulia, can I ask you a question? I missed something. If you're a customer in a location and you don't match, what happens to you? Do you draw another one? You stay there? You might go some other way?
You stay there and you search for exactly the same destination.
So you can never find an alternative way to go there or something? Or?
No, so that's all captured by the Kappa-ij, right? Again, this is a steady state. But so basically, you know, if there is an alternative way to get there, you're not even going to start searching for transportation.
Sorry, can I ask a question about individual probabilities of matching in locations that are empty on either side? So either no ships, what's the expectation of a ship that out of equilibrium decides to go there?
That's a good question, but I'm not sure. So we are gonna, yeah, I'm not sure. Actually, maybe one of my co-author knows better.
Do you mean, are you thinking heterogeneity in either side? Is that what you mean, or?
No, I'm just thinking the way you defined the P's, what are they called? The lambdas. They're ratios. And at the denominator, you may find a 0. Is the thing then going to plus infinity?
I think, but if, sorry, but if it's 0, if the number of so we do assume that if the number if on either side you have no searchers, the matching probability is 0, right? Okay.
That means there are potential coordination failure, I guess, in those.
Yes, that's a good point.
So I think, so in the paper, we are somehow assuming that you never have the situation, because in our empirical exercise, we're going to have some basically shocks that prevents this situation. So you can somehow modify the model to allow for that, and you're going to have the problem that you mentioned, but we are somehow ruling that out in the empirical application, basically.
Excellent. Okay, let me, okay, so if we are all on board with the model, let me tell you how we leverage this to think about efficiency. And to do that, basically, we are going to want to compare an equilibrium allocation with the efficient allocation. And so let me start by defining these two objects. So we are going to focus, starting with the market equilibrium. We are going to focus on steady state equilibrium, which are composed of a matrix of transportation prices that for every I and j tell us the price to go from I to j. Together with an allocation which includes the following objects. First of all, we are going to have a matrix Q of matches that for every I and j tell us the number of carriers who leave empty in each period to go from I to j. We have a matrix of empty carriers that for every I and j tell us the number of carriers who leave empty to go from I to j in each period. Then we have a vector of carriers waiting in each location. Sorry, and then we have a vector of customers waiting in each location. And finally, we have this destination share that for every I and j tell us the share of customer in I who want to go to j. So for this allocation to be an equilibrium, first of all, it must be feasible. So it must satisfy some standard steady state constraints. And it must satisfy a fleet constraint that ensures essentially that the number of carriers in each location is consistent with the total fleet, which we treat as exogenous. And finally, some matching constraint. These ensure that the matches that are formed are consistent with the matching technology given the number of agents and carriers searching in each location. Moreover, the allocation must be consistent with optimal behavior, meaning that carrier and customer decision must be optimal. And also, I should emphasize that in the context of the slide, we are going to focus on a limit economy where agents are patient. It doesn't really bias. It helps us showcase the results and beautify a little bit the theorems, but it doesn't really bias us anything. And indeed, in the paper, we generalize this for the case where agents are patient.
Sorry, for beta different than 1, strictly smaller than 1, you cannot really do welfare in steady state. So
No.
you need it.
Yes, exactly.
Got something about the prices. So I'm missing the part like prices are such that something or
Oh yeah, yeah, sorry.
Or...
This is the consistent with optimal behavior. So prices are going to shape the agent's behavior that is captured by this allocation satisfy the value function that I've just shown, and they depend on the prices.
But I'm still missing. I mean, that tells me optimal behavior given prices, and then the prices are such that. Sorry.
Yeah.
So in search, I mean, in search models, we either have like a protocol for the price, or if you're thinking competitive, prices are such that market's clear. But so here, which is it? Is it, do you have a protocol, or prices are such that the allocation satisfies some condition, or yeah.
So is that such that the allocation satisfies some condition, right? So which are captured by these feasibility constraints, and they're consistent with the optimal behavior. So
I understand correctly. The prices are exogenous. In your definition of equilibrium, the set of prices tau is an exogenous list. It has to satisfy some conditions.
No,
but it's not derived from a protocol.
No, it's not derived from a protocol. It could be derived so we are going to be, so our definition of basically, we are gonna allow for different price, for any price protocol to arise, basically.
So this is for any set of prices, you're gonna, okay.
Exactly.
So prices are exogenous, and you're gonna leave yourself freedom to then pick a protocol later.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
I have a question for Giulia and Guido, actually. So you spoke about maximizing state welfare for the welfare analysis, and that being only valid when I equal 1, but you can still write Hamiltonian. Or anyway, write that program problem for the planner, right?
I cannot.
Pierre, you're cutting in and out a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm
sorry.
Okay.
No, so what so Guido hinted that beta equal 1 is necessary to think of a planner that maximizes steady state welfare. However, it's you can still write the dynamic optimization problem of the planner and deal with welfare for beta.
Yeah. So that's what we do in the paper. So we have beta lower than 1, and you know, the social planner maximizes the discount sum of the agent's payoff.
All right, good, thanks.
Yes, can I just clarify that, because there was a comment before that we actually need the beta to define efficiency. So the fact is that with beta smaller than 1 is the planner problem becomes a different one. So it becomes basically a problem that depends on the state that you start from. So it's you know, it's a completely different criterion, and this is basically the main reason why, you know, beta equal 1 basically helps with the exposition and with the cleanness of the result, because otherwise we have to require basically optimality on every trajectory for every starting point. So that's what we do in the.
You can still define a steady state for the planning solution. Right?
And for what it's worth, in the appendix, we do it, right? So in the appendix, we have beta smaller than 1 and off steady state. So
yeah, so
neither buys as much.
The problem is that also like considering steady state is also tied to beta equal 1, right? So when you have beta smaller than 1, you cannot directly confine yourself and the planner to think in steady state. You have to consider also the out of steady state dynamics for efficiency in that case.
Since we are on this topic, if you consider beta smaller than 1, then your definition of equilibrium also has to be enriched.
Yes.
Correct, yeah. Okay, so efficiency. We talked about this a little bit, but what's an efficient allocation is going, first of all, to maximize the steady state, you know, the total welfare. What is this object? Well, In every period, which is this object here, let me read it to you. In every period, you have QIJ customers leaving full from going from I to J. They get their valuation from being delivered WIJ, and they pay their entry cost kappa IJ. Moreover, in every period, you have EI customers searching in each location and paying their search cost. Similarly, you have SI carrier searching in each location and paying their search cost. Finally, you have carriers traveling, and in particular in every period, you have QIJ carriers traveling full from I to J or starting to travel full from I to J, BIJ carrier who start to travel empty from I to J. For every period that they travel, they pay a transportation cost CIJS, and they travel on average for the AJ periods. So the allocation must maximize this welfare. Subject to, well, we still have the steady state constraints, we still have the total fleet constraints. Importantly, we still have the matching constraints. Again, the social planner cannot do anything about search frictions, so takes the constraints imposed by the matching technology as given. So we want to compare these two objects, which is not obvious because we don't have a closed form solution for either of them, and we're not gonna find one. So the first step is basically rewriting the social planner's problem, the market equilibrium allocation in a way that makes it easy to compare it with the social planner's problem. This is what this theorem is doing. And in particular, it's telling us that if you take an allocation, which is a limit equilibrium, then it must solve this problem, okay, which we are going to call the market's problem. So the allocation is going to maximize social welfare. This is exactly the same objective function as the social planner. It's going to satisfy the steady state, total fleet, and matching constraints. So what's the difference between the social planner and the market problem? Well, the market problem take matching rates lambda and destination shares G as basically given constants, while the social planner problem internalizes or looks at this object as functions of the agent's behavior. So this tells us two things. First of all, any sort of inefficiency in this market comes from these three objects, okay, being set suboptimally. It also tells us that the problem that may arise is that the market doesn't internalize the impact that search behavior has on matching rates, lambda, and on destination share G. And basically, this highlights two sources of inefficiency or distortion in this market. First, as you all know, whenever you have search frictions in the market, the individual agent's decision to start searching affects matching rate for everyone else. And basically, this result is telling us that in the market equilibrium, agents may fail to internalize this impact that they have. And because of that, the number of agents searching may be distorted away from the optimum. So this is the famous Tintic market externalities that were, I think, first discussed by Hosius in the 90s. However, there's an additional layer of distortion in this model, which comes from the fact that customers not only decide whether to search, but they also decide where to go. And if you think about it, the agent's decision about where to go impacts the distribution of carriers over space. So basically, I am in Manhattan. I want to get a cab to go to Long Island. Well, the cab is going to pick me up, drop me off in Long Island, and basically it will have to start searching for their next passenger there, right? And it's not a great place because there are not that many people who want to go from Long Island to Manhattan. So what the result is telling us is that customers may fail to internalize this impact that they have on the distribution of carriers over space. So not only the number of agents may be distorted, but the composition of trips that are realized is going to be distorted away from the optimum. And we call this pooling externality, as it will be clear in a second reason.
That's a clarifying question. So the result is for any price mechanism we could dream up, there's no way to internalize this. No. I'm going to, in a second, I'm going to characterize exactly the price mechanism that allows you to internalize this externality. So this inefficiency result is then for what price mechanism? So far I was understanding that we kept it open and given.
Exactly. So for now, I'm saying this may go wrong. So the fact that you have an efficient market equilibrium does not automatically implies that these externalities are internalized. And then I'm going to specify a specific price mechanism that you need to have to internalize them. A little bit like in Hosius, I guess.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to analyze these three sources of externality in turn. And to do that, I need to introduce some notation. First of all, the carriers internalize the intrinsic market externality if the number of carriers searching in each location is set optimally. Similarly for customers. And finally, customers internalize this pooling externality if the distribution shares are set optimally given the rest of the allocation. And the first result tells us exactly what are the conditions that this allocation must satisfy to internalize these three sources of externality. The first point has to do with the Tintic market externality, which are internalized by carriers if and only if for every location I this condition is satisfied. And I know it's not super intuitive if you just look at it for the first time, but actually what this is telling us is very intuitive. It's telling us that the individual value from searching must be equal to the social value of searching. And to see that, let me read you this expression. So what's the private value of searching for a carrier? Well, the carrier starts searching with some probability lambda, they find a match. And if they find a match, we denote by delta the surplus for a carrier from matching with a customer who want to go to J. And here we are taking the average using these destination shares as weighting matrix. So this is the average surplus that the carrier get from matching in location I. What's the social value from searching? Well, if a carrier search, it increases the number of matches as measured by this matching function, by the derivative of the matching function with respect to the number of agents searching. And what's the value of each match? Well, it's equal to the surplus that the carrier gets from matching plus the surplus that the customer gets, right? So this is the total surplus that is created by matching, by a matching between a carrier and the customer who want to go to J. Again, we are taking the expectation using this destination share. So this condition tells us for an allocation to internalize Tintic market externality on the carrier side, the private value of searching must be equal to the social value of searching. And of course, we have a similar condition for customers. The second condition has to do with this pooling externality, and it's telling us that they are internalized if and only if for every location I, the carrier surplus from matching this delta ij doesn't depend on the destination, doesn't depend on where the customer wants to go. Okay, so since this condition is an important contribution of the paper, let me spend a couple of minutes more telling you about it. So basically, this condition replicates a very standard no arbitrage condition that you would have in a frictionless world, right? In a frictionless world, the competition among customers would ensure that the price to go to some destination coincides with the carrier's opportunity cost to go to that destination, right? And this automatically makes the carriers indifferent across different trips and ensure that who's paying the cost of going to some location is the customer, right? And this ensures that the composition of these trips is optimal. What's happening here is that we are missing this destination-specific market. None of these wouldn't be a problem with directed search. However, because of the randomness in search, consumers are pulled together, and this prevents the carriers from competing with one another to serve a specific type of customers, and essentially introduces a wedge between the price to go to some destination and the opportunity cost of doing that. Okay, and because of that, when customers decide where to go, they're not going to internalize the full cost, the full opportunity cost of going there. By this discussion, you also probably already understood that this type of externality are going to favor customers or destination who have low social value. So we're going to have too many customers who get a cab to go to Long Island, essentially.
I don't understand the last point you said. I don't understand how you can make the last point without specifying what the actual protocol is. Because I can imagine a funky situation in which the prices are such that the pooling externality is favoring destination with high social value.
Yeah, so
it's the same question as Ricardo.
yes, so all of these points, what I'm saying is that it's not enough to have an equilibrium, right? Like you may have an equilibrium, but you may fail to internalize this externality. And again, in a second, I'm going to show you the, actually, let me do it right now. If, you know, like this set of conditions automatically, basically can be mapped into some efficient prices, which are, you know, the only price that can sustain the efficient allocation. Okay, so anything else, Nash bargaining, you're going to run into these inefficiencies. Okay.
But yeah, so just going back, isn't there a statement where of the kind it favors destination where customer have low private value, no? So because when a customer goes in that market, he displays a bunch of customers and he displays them at random effectively. So you're gonna have probably over entry of customer who have low social or low private value.
Both, right? Like both private value, but also, right, that are going to destination where carriers do not want to go, right? This is an example, definitely, and we are going to show you in the empirical application that's true for Nash bargaining. It's true. It's not true under all possible price mechanisms, this last point. Okay? Does that answer to your question?
Okay. I'm curious, in the steady state equilibrium, is there any dead heading? Do you have empty ships going places, or?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we do have, and in the empirical application, I'm going to show you that around 40% of the ship at sea right now, you know, at every given time is traveling empty somewhere. And this is just, this really has to do with the fact that you're going to have heterogeneous valuation, right? Heterogeneous private valuation and entry cost, which naturally create these empty, you know,
I see.
empty travelers.
I see. So the way to think of this result is you had all those, you're trying to match up these accessory conditions, and then you solve for the tau IJs, and this happens to be the unique one, actually, you say?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, yes. I see.
Yeah.
I see. And
so the value functions, yes, that's correct.
Okay, and this also, so if you have n locations or something like that,
yeah,
then you have this n by n matrix. So this, I cannot see from here. Is it symmetric? It's not necessarily symmetric, or is it? No,
it's
okay.
not, definitely not.
Okay, yeah. Okay, and the last one is, how do you get the entry margin to, I mean, this also fixes the entry margin?
Yes.
I see. Okay.
Yes, so you mean the Hosius?
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
And indeed, sorry, I should have, I didn't introduce the notation, but you'll see that this is the elasticity of the matching function with respect to the number of carriers searching. And and I'm going to show you it in the next slide, but we know from Hosius that this must appear somewhere in the prices, right? To make sure that the entry decision are optimal. So let me show you the next slide. So I think it's useful.
Giulia, you have about 20 minutes.
Okay. So I think it's useful in order to interpret these prices, I think it's useful to look at look at a rewriting of these prices. In particular, it's easy to show that basically these efficient prices satisfy this equality. Okay, so if you ignore for a second this is just Nash bargaining, just right. I told you that delta IJ are the surplus for carrier and exporters from matching, from the match. And basically, so if you ignore this term, this just tell you this is just Nash bargaining, a specific Nash bargaining in which the bargaining weights equal the elasticity of the matching function with respect to the number of exporters. Okay, and this is the standard Hosius condition that you're all familiar with. However, in this condition where we have these heterogeneous agents, there is this additional term here. So what is this term? So this is the total surplus that comes from the match. And this is instead the average surplus that comes from matches in a given location I. So basically, whenever the surplus coming from a match is higher for a specific destination, is higher than the average, this term is positive. What this is doing is increasing essentially the outside option for the exporter, and so it's lowering the price for that exporter. So what this is doing is subsidizing trips toward a destination with high, high surplus and taxing destination with low surplus, again, compared to Nash bargaining. So this is all nice. These prices are convenient, both if you have to compute the efficient allocation on your computer, or if you are talking about a market where prices can actually be posted. It's not very useful for many markets where this is not possible. So on top of that, what we do is we assume that prices are set through Nash bargaining. And for these cases, we are able to derive optimal taxes and subsidies that can sustain the efficient allocation. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but basically the very broad idea is that the planner can tax the weighting or subsidize the weighting agents to correct thintic market externalities, and they can tax loaded trips to correct the pooling externality. If they want to fix box externality, they can either tax carriers and the matches, or customers and the matches. Okay.
Giulia, so, can I interrupt you 1 second? Can you go back to this slide when we have the tau ij equal, like the result? So I'm trying to see, this looks simpler than it is, right? There's a bunch of tau ij's on the right-hand side as well.
Yes, so in order
and allocation. So these prices depend on the distribution of agents across different points.
Yeah, so to compute it, you need to compute so it's you need a fixed point.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But so these tau ij's in principle, they're also functions of the distributions of peoples in different states, or they're not? Sorry. I mean, the meeting probabilities are in there. The matching functions are on the right side. So in principle, you need. I mean, it's okay. What object is this? This is like a functional equation, the tau ij. What is this?
So yes, so these are, it depends on the value functions, right?
Okay.
Can I try, let me try to say something. Maybe it's a guess that is correct. Everything on the right-hand side can be computed off of the social planner solution.
So actually, it's not from this prices equation, but we recently showed that you can take like for every allocation for every allocation actually you can compute the prices that sustain it. In these cases, basically you have the value function of the agents that in steady state doesn't directly appear in the social planner's problem. So this also depends on prices, right? And depend on matching probabilities.
But I think what he just said is right. So basically there are two ways to do that. So the first way is what we are doing actually computational is easier, and what we do when you compute it is to solve a fixed point where you compute for equilibrium every time. But the second way is, so this delta ij, you can actually derive them from the planner's problem without any explicit reference to the prices. So that's
those are just derivative of the planner's value function evaluated at steady state.
Exactly.
Correct, yeah. Good.
Sorry, can I also ask a different question?
Yes.
When you do the no discounting full transitions, do the taus need to change? Actually, it's not clear to me, because there is this perfectly elastic supply of customers at each location. So just like in Mortensen and Pissarides, I suspect that the optimal taus remain constant throughout the transition.
Oh, that...
Not true.
No,
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Actually, one thing we should also point out is that so in the paper, actually, we don't have perfectly elastic entry. So basically, we're going to have this free entry condition that is going to hold for the marginal customer. So it's going to be, so this is expositional. It's easier to think about free entry, but that's not what we're doing.
All right, so let me move on we have 15 minutes, maybe 10. So, and tell you about the empirical application, where we basically take all these theoretical results and apply them to the dry bulk shipping industry. So bulk shipping refers to homogeneous unpacked dry cargo for individual shippers on non-scheduled routes. So basically, this is the main mode of transportation for international trade in raw materials. And indeed, the biggest cargo are iron ore, grain, coal. you have steel, fertilizers. And under many point of view, this industry really works like a taxi cab drivers, taxi cab market. So it's an unconcentrated industry. These carriers are homogeneous. Each trip is associated with only one cargo. So as an example, there are no multiple stops. And importantly, like taxi cabs, there is no centralized market or platform. Instead, the contacts between shippers and exporters happen through a sparse network of brokers. So these are actual people who receive actual email, 1,000 every day on average. They parse through this email and they find possible matches. Contrarily to the taxi cab market, prices are negotiated, which we are going to model assuming that they are set through Nash bargaining. On data size, we observe a large sample of shipping contracts. These are contracts for given trips. And for each contract, we observe the price that it's paid by the exporter to the shipper, the origin, the destination, and the time of the trip. Moreover, we have information on ship movements for around 5,000 vessels, which are half of the worldwide fleet. And we observe their position every 6 minutes. On top of that, we observe their draft, which is the portion of the hull which is submerged, which we use to say if a ship is full or empty. Moreover, we collect data on weather at sea, which we are going to use as an instrument. So to give you a rough idea of the data, and as well as the some very rough patterns, here we plot the movements for a 10 days window, and you see already that most of the actions is in and out of China, and the reason is that these countries are, to sustain their industrial production, they are importing a lot of raw material, mostly from Australia, Brazil, North America. And you can confirm this story if you look at who are the net importer and net exporters. And in this map, the yellow countries are, orange countries are net importers. The purple one are net exporters. So one other thing that you can see from this picture is that most countries are neither net importer or net exporter, which means that usually a ship cannot pick up a cargo in the same location where they drop off, where they unloaded. Instead, they're going to have to travel long distances empty. And actually, if we were to look at the ships at sea right now, you would see that 42% of them is traveling empty somewhere. Now, these asymmetries immediately reflect in prices. And in particular, we find that ships, the shippers demand a higher price to unload the cargo in a location where it's difficult to find another match or where the match value is low. And this is clear if you look at the second column of this table, where we regress the price, daily price that it's paid by the exporter to the shipper, on a bunch of characteristics about the destination. And in particular, we find that if a ship that trips to destination where the ship has higher probability of leaving empty, this is leaving ballast, are associated with higher price. And similarly, if conditional on leaving empty, the ship expects to travel longer distances, again, the price is higher. One other thing that emerges from this table is that there is a lot of price dispersion. In the first column, we regress this price on destination, origin, quarter fixed effect. These explain at most 70% of the variation. And from the last column, you see that we regress these prices also on an indicator for the commodity transported. And what emerges is that if you're transporting coal, which is very cheap, you're going to pay low price. If you're transporting grain, which is very expensive, you're going to pay a high price. So these already tell you something about search frictions in this market. To really convince you, what we do in the paper is develop a test for search frictions. So we want to test that the number of matches is lower than the number of ships or the number of exporters. And this is difficult to do because we don't observe exporters. I'm not going to be able to solve it, show it to you due to time, but encourage you to have a look if you're curious. And also, I'm not going to tell you anything about how we estimate the model. The only thing that I want to emphasize is, again, we developed this way to recover the matching function as well as the number of exporters searching, right? And the difficulty here is that one side of the market compared to other labor model is not observed, right? We don't know how many exporters are searching, and so we need to be creative on how to solve that. Yeah?
Giulia, can I ask you a question? So is it possible to identify the model without imposing the Nash bargaining assumption? Can you kind of take the price, just like in the steady state, can you take the prices given, so the trade flows, and identify all the parameters this way?
Yeah, almost. So the reason why we need to impose this is because we want to recover the exporter side. I think that and in particular, the Nash bargaining, it's going to be an important object, right? That is going to be for us.
Because the reason I'm asking is that, a lot of the questions were about whether or not there's efficient pricing. And it seems like that's something you want to test. You don't necessarily want to assume that there's inefficiency. So if you could identify most of the parameters, kind of solve the planners, and then compare whether the price are efficient or not.
Actually, so as an example, we can test for the pooling externality, and I'm going to show you in a second, without assuming anything on the pricing mechanism.
Okay.
In order to test for the thin-tick market externality, because we, I think because we need to recover the exporters, so I think to thin-tick market externality, instead we need we need the exporters side, and for that we need to assume Nash bargaining. But for the pooling, we are all set. So I'm not going to tell you about how we estimate this matching function, and I'm going to spend the last 2 minutes telling you about welfare loss in the market for in dry bulk shipping. And the first thing that I want to tell you, going back to what Gia was saying, is are these thin-tick market externality internalized? And because we assume Nash bargaining, basically the condition boils down to checking whether the Nash bargaining coefficient is equal to the elasticity of the matching function. So this is what we plot here. The histogram is the elasticity of the matching function at different point in time. The vertical dotted line is the average value of this elasticity. The black vertical line is the bargaining coefficient. They are very different for all of the market. This is not surprising because this is somewhat a knife edge condition. What's interesting is that usually the elasticity of the matching function is much smaller than the bargaining coefficient. What this is telling us is that an additional ships who start searching doesn't increase matches by that much, but they are getting very high prices. So what the social planner will want to do is lower price, ensure that exporters come in because they have a positive externality on the matching function, and this is going to increase welfare. Pooling externality, again, here we don't need any assumption on the pricing mechanism. The condition was that ships needed to be indifferent across different matching with exporter going to different destinations. So for every origin, we compute the coefficient of the variation of this matching surplus. And you see that on average is almost 50%. So much higher than the 0% that you would have in an efficient, if prices were set efficiently. So to conclude, we want to look at, we want to quantify this welfare lot. So we impose the efficient prices and we find the efficient allocation, which is, and we find that this increases welfare by 6%. We also compute total welfare that gain that you get by completely eradicating search friction, which is 14%. So the first point about this number is that they are large. In particular, if you look at what they mean in terms of trade volume and value, shut it down, the efficient prices can increase trade volume by 13% and trade value by 11%. But beyond that, I think it's useful to compare this result, and this goes back to Manoli's questions at the beginning. And the reason is because we can look at this first, because they tell us something about the benefits of platform. They basically tell us, this first best, basically you can think about it as an upper bound to the value of having a platform like Uber in this market, right? Because what they tell us and what the way we are modeling them is that they are going to, shut down search frictions. this is only an upper bound, though, because platforms to centralize their market, they are going to ask back market power. So basically, comparing these two numbers tell us that the social planner can achieve 45% of the gains from the centralization without, giving up, without the problem of market power. Next, I'm out of time. Just
take a few minutes, Giulia.
We shut down each of these externalities in turn to see their different role. And basically, first of all, even if you just shut down pooling, authentic externality, welfare goes up substantially. But this number really masks the fact that this type of externality have a different impact, a different role. And in particular, this is very clear if you look at changes in volume of trade and value of trade. In particular, think market externality increase the volume of trade by a lot. Why? Well, they really have to do with the number of agents searching. The pooling externality don't have this impact on the number of agents searching. However, they have a substantial impact on the trade value. And this is not surprising because pooling externality really have to do with the composition, right? The optimality of the composition of the trip that are realized. So here I have different, just let me show these. So pooling had to do with the value of these trips, and I think this goes back to Pierre's question before. But what does it mean, right? Having a high value or a low value? Well, first of all, so to see that we look at the optimal tax on matches that can internalize pooling externality. Whenever it's negative, it means that it's a subsidy to the exporter. And as you can see, exporter with high private value or low private cost get, are subsidized, long trip are taxed. But this is not it, right? We have a model where the continuation values of the ships are an important ingredient. And indeed, you see that trips to destination with that are large exporters are subsidized because basically you want to send ships there. And instead you're gonna tax trips that are headed to destination with, that are associated with high probability of ballast, so ships have to leave empty, or that conditional on leaving, you're gonna have travel empty long distances. So this is it. In the paper, we also characterize some simpler policy instruments, just in case, one would think that, these policy instruments that we propose are too complex. The only notable thing that I want to emphasize is that, a simple tax on matches which depend on distances has basically negligible effect on welfare. So this tells us something, I think, about the taxi cab market where this type of pricing is standard. So this is it. I basically talked about efficiency, optimal policy in transport market. With these empirics, we showed you how you can improve welfare in a decentralized fashion. I showed you that optimal policies achieve almost half of the welfare gain from centralization, and I showed you how these different externality work. Basically, I want to emphasize that these pooling externality really are not specific to the transport market. You're going to find them in any frictional market with heterogeneous agents. And if there are no, well, and that's it. And thank you very much. And let's move on to the questions.
Great, thanks, Giulia. So now we'll open it up for questions. If you're an attendee, if you want to ask a question live, just use the Zoom raised hand feature and we'll unmute you so you can ask your questions. Panelists, you could just unmute yourself and ask questions if you want. Thanks.
Can I ask you a question? So in a counterfactual, would it be possible to calculate, you said you don't want to think about the planner as having market power, but it seems like market power is not necessarily that bad here because it's a two-sided market. So I'm not sure that a platform would extract that much surplus. So could you compute? Could you do that as a counterfactual, like a platform that maximizes revenue?
So that's a very complicated problem, and it's one that Nicola is solving in his job market paper.
Okay.
But actually, they have, no, just very briefly, a lot of the previous papers that have looked at Uber, like the paper by Alessandro Lizzeri and Tobias and Guillaume Frechet and Nick Buchholz, they all model Uber exactly like that. They sort of say, take a matching function that's the minimum. So that was our starting, that was like the comparison we wanted to make.
It's not clear that it's the right thing to do. In a sense, you're presumably that matching function has some heterogeneity underneath that Uber cannot simply wipe out. So maybe I would think of Uber as the platform that sets the pricing mechanisms correctly, more than eliminating search frictions. Search frictions are God knows what.
And take Nicola's paper.
Yeah, I mean, for sure there are still some, geographical matching frictions. I just don't know if, in the case of Uber, the correct way to think about them is this two-sided search model. Is more like a coordinated matching technology, but I agree that there are going to be some geographical frictions that are still there even if you have a platform that match both sides.
By the way, Nicola, it's impossible to find your email address online.
Yeah. I think it should be on the paper, right? But I can also send it in the chat.
Yes, so I think it would be really interesting. Maybe you do it in the paper. I haven't looked at it, but if you, at least in some cases, showed us what the efficient prices look like, what the prices that implement the efficient allocation look like. So anyway, and then another thing would be, I know it's hard maybe to get so much analytical traction, but if you were to look at the planner dynamics, even numerically, for some cases, then, those prices would be super interesting. I think, I don't know, because then you can see how they depend on different densities of searches on both sides. I mean, this is the problem that Uber tries to solve, right?
Yeah.
When you have surge pricing, when you don't, and all of a sudden you have some, you could imagine, like at this times of high demand, so lots of people want to move, you'd like to see what those prices look like. I think, and you're kind of set up to do it. Yeah, so anyways.
Yeah,
I should say that in the empirical application, so now I switched, I didn't cover it because of time, but a big chunk of the empirical application is actually looking at how these efficient prices look like, right? When they are high, when they are low, and for which countries are high or low. And one thing that I didn't say, but I think it's interesting, is that in particular in the empirical application, there are some countries that are net that are taxed more or less, but in every country exporters actually pay off revenues, pay off increase. So that's kind of an.
Julia, it might be useful to show the map to Ricardo as well, just to go over it. It gives a little bit of intuition.
So basically, so here we plot what are the average import taxes for different countries, and the import toward countries with light colors are subsidized, and instead darker colors are taxed. And so basically, what really emerges is that import for countries that are large and valuable exporters are subsidized, and instead, and these are countries like North America and Australia. So whenever you want a ship to be there, because the country is a big exporter, you're gonna subsidize import, and instead, whenever you are a country that doesn't export much, and or the value of your export are relatively low, like as an example, West Africa or even Indonesia, then you're gonna tax import in that countries. And if you want to look at instead the thin-tick market externality, basically what happens is that you're like in almost all countries, you're going to lower shipping prices because given our estimates of matching function and bargaining weights, basically prices are too high to correctly incentivize entry of exporters, right? The exporters, when they enter, they increase matching rates by a lot, but the prices are too high to have the correct level of entry.
I suggest another exercise, related exercise, but twisting the last quantitative stuff on its head. Instead of estimating matching function elasticities and figuring out price distortions, why not doing one version in which you assume that prices are correct, that they are those prices that the planner would want, and see whether they spit out an associated matching elasticity that is within the standard errors of your estimates empirically. So is the data, is the hypothesis of efficient pricing rejected by data on matching functions? I don't know, something to do.
So let me think 1 second. So again, for the pooling externality, we don't make any assumption on the matching function or on the pricing mechanism. We just look at matching rates, which are observed, and observed prices. And given that, we basically can compute the surplus from matching for a ship, for an exporter headed to different destination, and we get these. So that, but for the pooling, which is similar to what JF was saying, I think.
Wait, but isn't there a way to rationalize these as unobserved differences in some of the C's? So one efficiency condition is that basically the buyer is the residual claimant on the costs, but you don't see really the ship costs.
No, so this is an estimated object that we can estimate only looking at where ships go empty. And again, we don't assume anything for the matching function of prices. We take the observed objects, and we can looking at where ships go empty, we can compute the waiting cost in different locations and compute this object. But you are exactly right.
So maybe going back to the question on platforms, are there intermediaries in those markets? So it looked like you might be able to attain efficiency with competition or constrain efficiency via competition of intermediaries who form portfolios of exporters, essentially.
Yeah, so I find this question of how these brokers industry work extremely fascinating, and so you know we keep looking for data on specifically how this matching works. My sense is that you shouldn't think really about, in this market, you really shouldn't think about competing brokers. Actually, my sense is that they have substantial market power, which you can think of as a way to actually microfound these search frictions in the first place.
All right. Okay.
Well, can I ask a bit of a general question? So you characterize the efficient prices, and then you compare this to a very, very particular protocol, which is the Nash bargaining, and there's many settings that we know that doesn't work. But in principle, there could be other protocols that work better. So I was wondering, do you have any perhaps general conditions? I mean, have you tried to work through something like that? So a type of protocol that might work, or a type of protocol that might not? Because you know, all of our discussion about prices was a little bit up in the air because the decentralized prices were not characterized or were not described. So it was not immediately obvious, at least to me, whether the efficient prices, there was a reason to presume that, you know, that they would not be equal to the decentralized prices or not.
Yeah, so, well, posted price, if they are correct, that they work. So that's an excellent point, and I think we could do more to answer this question. One thing I think that it's useful is, you know, there's no bargain. Like Nash bargaining, of course, doesn't it's not efficient, but also, you know, if you do one-sided offers are not efficient, right? Like if I make a take it or leave it offers are not efficient. We can think more. It would be nice. We haven't done it to think more on the positive side, like what is the bargaining protocol? How does the pricing protocol need to look like in order to spit out that basically efficient prices? Yeah, we could do that, unless maybe you have.
We characterize the efficient prices. Sorry,
You don't have in mind, right, a specific bargaining protocol, right, that generates as an, you know, and if you look at the equilibrium of that bargaining protocol, that's the, you know, you have the efficient prices.
Yeah, no, my question was, right, you have the efficient prices. The question is, what are the decentralized prices? So is there, if there is the decentralized prices would need to differ for there to be an inefficiency. And the question is, how are the decentralized prices determined? But okay, I guess that relates back to, sorry, yeah, that was the question. So.
One thing that maybe speak to that is that we do so given Nash bargaining, we do characterize the optimal, you know, set of taxes and tariffs. So taxes and subsidies, such that if you have these tariffs, these taxes and Nash bargaining, the efficient outcome is attained. But I see your point anyway. I don't know if there are questions from the Q&A that I'm missing.
Great. Is there any other questions for Giulia or co-authors? If not, we'll thank them. Thank you, Giulia, and for the presentation. Thanks for all the panelists and the attendees. Our next talk is going to be, our next seminar is going to be not till September 21st, but this Friday, we have a workshop on liquidity in fixed income markets. You can find all the information on our website, register. It's going to be a great workshop. So thanks everyone again.
Thank you.